Hello, I am the Hermit, and welcome to the Shed. In the heart of Paris, beneath the glittering lights and iconic street, lies a dark chapter in history. A chapter marked by violence, repression, and the struggle for freedom. On the night of October 17, 1961, thousands of Algerian men, women, and children marched through the city, demanding an end to the injustice of French colonial rule. But what began as a peaceful demonstration quickly turned into a nightmare. French police, under orders from the government, unleashed a wave of brutality that would leave hundreds unalived, many bodies thrown into the Seine River. For decades, this tragedy was silenced, forgotten, and denied. But today, we remember the victims and the events that shook Paris to its core. Thousands of Algerians living in France participated in a peaceful demonstration organized by the National Liberation Front, FLN for short. This protest was in response to a curfew that had been imposed by the French authorities, specifically targeting the Algerian population living in Paris. The curfew was part of the broader crackdown on the FLN's activities in France, as the FLN was actively fighting for Algeria's independence from French colonial rule. The events of that night would end in one of the darkest episodes of police violence in modern French history. The protest was a coordinated effort by the FLN, which had a strong presence among the Algerian diaspora in France. The goal of the demonstration was to show solidarity with the independence movement and to protest against the harsh treatment of Algerians in Paris, who were subjected to racial discrimination, police harassment, and violence. The FLN encouraged Algerians to take part in the peaceful march, which involved men, women, and even children. The protesters were told to march without arms or any force of violence to emphasize their demand for justice, equality, and independence. An estimated 20,000 to 30,000 Algerians gathered across several parts of Paris, including major areas like Champs-Élysées and the central boulevards. The marchers carried banners and signs calling for an end to the curfew and for Algerian independence. Many of them wore their best clothes, emphasizing the peaceful and dignified nature of the protest. They aimed to make their voices heard through non-violent means, in contrast to the violent tactics often associated with the broader war effort. Despite the peaceful intentions of the demonstrators, the French authorities, led by Maurice Papon, the head of Parisian police, were prepared for a violent response. Papon, who had previously served in the Vichy regime and was implicated in the deportation of Jews during World War II, had a reputation for ruthless repression. The police were deployed in large numbers, and many officers were given free rein to use force against the protesters. As the demonstrations unfolded, the response from the police was swift and brutal. They used batons, tear gas, and firearms to disperse the crowds. Thousands of Algerians were beaten, many to the point of unaliveness. In some of the most horrific acts of violence, protesters were thrown into the Seine River, where they drowned. Numerous eyewitnesses reported seeing bodies floating in the river, while others described the police indiscriminately attacking unarmed men, women, and children. The violence was not limited to the streets. Thousands of Algerians were arrested and detained in some makeshift holding centers, where many were subjected to further abuse, including torture. Some detainees were kept for days without access to legal representation or even basic necessities. The brutality of the police crackdown was shocking in its scale. In the immediate aftermath, the French government downplayed the extent of the massacre. Officials' reports stated that only a few people had died, but over time, independent investigations and historical research revealed the true scope of the violence. While the exact number of fatalities remains disputed, it is estimated that between 100 and 300 Algerians were killed that night, though some historians suggest the number could be higher. Thousands were injured, and the impact of the violence left deep scars in the Algerian community in France. The massacre was largely covered up by the French authorities at the time. The French media, under government pressure, either ignored the event or reported it in a way that minimized the scale of the violence. It was not until decades later, through the efforts of historians, journalists, and the survivors, that the full extent of the massacre began to come to light. The October 17th massacre has since become a symbol of the brutal repression faced by Algerians during their struggle for independence and the ongoing struggle for justice and recognition in post-colonial France. In 1998, the French government finally acknowledged that dozens of Algerians had been killed during the protests, though the full scope of the massacre is still not officially recognized. Commemorations of the event have grown in recent years, and it remains a painful reminder of the cost of colonialism and the violence that accompanied the end of the French Empire. These events left a deep scar on the history of France and Algeria, one marked by violence, repression, and silence. For decades the truth was hidden, the voices of the victims silenced, but history, once uncovered, demands acknowledgement. Today we remember the lives lost, the families torn apart, and the struggle for justice that continues. This tragic night reminds us of the price of freedom and the importance of confronting the darkest chapters of our past. Well, so that's it for this video. Thanks for hanging out, and I hope to see you again.